When we study the Code of Professional Conduct, it's very important that we understand the structure within that code, how the code is set up and designed, so that when we are looking for an answer, when we're trying to figure out how to deal with something, we know exactly where we are looking for it. Understand that the Code of Professional Conduct is a very practical code for us, and especially in exams, the way that it's going to come up is going to be very practical. The case studies that you'll be given will indicate an instance where a professional or a CA or a registered auditor has done something, and the requirement is going to be for you to evaluate whether or not they have complied with what the profession requires of them, whether or not they've complied with the professional conduct requirements in terms of the CPC. So there's a very specific structure that needs to be followed, and that's also going to depend on which part of the code you're reading. So let's take a look at the structure. The code is set up and it's divided into three parts. Part A is general application. This is your foundational issue. So this discusses your fundamental principles, your basic background that applies to everyone and applies to the code. We then will either use Part B or Part C, depending on whether or not we're dealing with CAs that are in public practice, in other words, your registered auditors, or whether or not we're dealing with CAs in business, people that are financial managers, financial directors, accountants, whatever the case is. So your Part B deals with auditors and Part C deals with your accountants in general, whether you're running a business, whether you are in commerce, you financial manager, financial director, accountant, CEO, whatever the case is. So your public practice for us as auditing students is where we spend a lot of our time studying, because this relates to how we as CAs should behave while we are doing audits on an audit. There are very specific requirements and they are quite different, so we need to be aware about which part we're dealing with before we decide which one to look at, because the requirements could be different. So be careful about which part you decide to use, and that's going to be dependent on your role. If the case study talks about the accountant, then we will look at Part C. If the case study talks about the auditor, we will look at Part B. So be very careful that we understand which item and which part we are dealing with. And again, the understanding is, for our purposes in terms of studying as auditing students, most of what we will be looking at is Part B.